Today on the Boss Battle Show, in a special two-part series, we're going to break down the life of Nintendo and its possible future going forward. What's up, guys? I am Adam Roden. This is... And today on the Boss Battle Show, we are going to take you through the rise of Nintendo to the kind of the potential fall to where is it going next?
To the future.
But before we can go to the future, we have to go back. Gamers in the early 1980s had no idea what was coming to them. Atari had a vice grip on the living room console, but then in 1983 in Japan, Nintendo launched the Famicom. And then 2 short years later, in 1985, it rebranded as the Nintendo Entertainment System and launched like a juggernaut in America.
So Atari was cool, right?
Atari was cool, yeah.
It was alright, like you had one.
Right, it was cool.
Little Pac-Man and stuff.
Yep.
But the game changer was the NES.
Yep. Nintendo came from humble beginnings, starting as a card company, and then they finally rebranded in the 50s, and then in the 80s, 1985, they released the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh,
and what happened?
It was amazing. Basically what they did is they took the arcades that you'd actually have to go out and dump your quarters into to play, one game at a time, if you're in the local Shakey's Pizza. They took all of those games, smashed them down, and put them in your house.
Put them in your house, and it was a complete game changer.
Yeah.
Nintendo Entertainment System had, I think by the time it ended up, it had something around like 700 titles out for it, ranging from the bad to the fantastic.
And they weren't even bad, because everything we played was so new.
Yeah,
so like even the ones that people were like, this one's not as good as this one, it was still cool to play and still cool to own.
That's true, because if you are like 6 and 7 year old Timmy and so on and so forth, even the crappiest game was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But not quite as mind-blowing as a particular two that I want to talk about, Super Mario Brothers and The Legend of Zelda, two games that I would say changed the entire face of gaming from there on out to where we are today.
And are almost equally as popular 25 plus years in the future.
Oh, most certainly. I mean...
merchandising, everything we've got.
You have a Mario tattoo somewhere on your body.
I do. It's down here.
There it is.
Now, I'd say the reason that this was so cool that we had the NES is before, when you played the games back in the day of like Atari and such, the games, you really had to use your imagination, because you really were a triangle shooting some circles, and you're like, oh, I'm a spaceship shooting asteroids. The NES, we actually got to see a whole new world, and that put us into places like the Mushroom Kingdom. Right?
Like the Mushroom Kingdom and Hyrule.
And Hyrule, yeah.
And what's really cool is, I would say, arguably, that Legend of Zelda is the first game that really fleshed out a story-driven experience.
Right.
And of course, there was many to follow with like Dragon Warrior and so on and so forth. But I would say that in 1986 and 1985, maybe when Zelda came out, it was the first time a kid could really dive in and be like, a narrative from start to finish that took you like anywhere from 20 to 100 hours. And
that comes from a lot of the games in the past where, like Pac-Man, for example, was an arcade experience. You always started with 0 points, and you tried to accrue as many points as possible. When you died, you were done, you started all over. Now, Zelda was one of the first games to actually have the ability to save your progress and keep that story going and try and actually build that world, as opposed to just, eating the most cherry.
Yep. And you kids now, you just click your start button, quick save. Back then, you had to press the reset button, hold that in, and then the power button.
The scariest moment of your life when you're like,
let go. Oh,
did it turn off okay?
Yep.
Yes.
So they had their run, and it was just world-changing. Nothing could beat Nintendo.
Right. And again, that's, like I said, that's because they took the arcade and they put it in your home. Then they went a step further.
Then they put it in your pocket.
And what do? We get the Game Boy.
Yeah.
I remember saving up with my little brother. We had like a butter jar that we wrapped in tape and cut a hole, made a piggy bank out of it, putting all of our money into it that we possibly could to try and get the Game Boy, because it was so cool to not only have those games at home, but now to have like that small version that I could play anywhere in the world.
And then, so they had their long run of success when things got a little bit bigger for them with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Just when people thought it couldn't get any better than it already had, in 1991, Nintendo released the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Bigger, badder, double the graphical capabilities, double the processing power. But they weren't the only ones looking to capitalize on gamers' insatiable lust for pixels. Begun, the console wars had...
Sega! Sega. You know what? Anytime there's money to be had, other companies are going to jump in and try and make it.
That's right. Entered the Sega Genesis, which was a direct competitor to the Super Nintendo. 16 bits, both on each end.
So there were other competitors to the NES, but not like this. This was mainstream success. This was a head-to-head battle. This was magazines that were, showcasing games on both sides and exclusive titles for both.
Yeah, and kids today, they'll argue, oh, my PlayStation's better than the Xbox better than PlayStation. It all started here, folks.
This is when shots were fired.
Shots were fired. And kids, like today with PlayStation, Xbox, not a lot of people had both,
Nope.
I had both. Because I'm
Sega guy, actually.
Yeah, he was a Sega guy. Gordy behind the camera was a Nintendo guy. It varied. I happen to enjoy both systems, but some things could be said for still how magical the Super Nintendo system was at the time. Games got bigger, badder, more buttons.
Oh yeah, and then more save capabilities and larger games, double the graphics, double the buttons, double the experience.
Yep.
And
double the fun.
Again,
double mint gum.
Yeah. But also again, we started to see new developers of games as well, because we saw a lot of first-party developers initially and kind of like one-off companies.
Yep.
And now we're seeing game companies get together, make games, and then pitch to Sega, pitch to SNES, see who wants to pitch to both.
And this is really when developers really started to hit their stride as as companies and careers. Arcade games were starting to be ported to these systems that you had decently faithful experiences to the arcade experience.
Yeah, like you could play NBA Jam in the arcade, and then you could play NBA Jam at home, and it was like, same experience.
Play Mortal Kombat.
Mm-hmm. And some with blood.
And and that's the fun thing is there was so many violence in video games came out around this time, and Super Nintendo, they made a snafu when Mortal Kombat first came out. They censored it, so Sega got all the huge sales on that, and then they brought in Mortal Kombat 2, which had all the blood, which also birthed the ESRB, which we're all familiar with now today.
And one of the best things you can ever do is create controversy.
That's right, and with controversy, Nintendo tried their hand early on at virtual reality, and they came out with the Virtual Boy shortly thereafter of the Super Nintendo, which was their first significant commercial failure.
Innovation can come at a price.
That's right. It wasn't quite time for it, and it didn't do well. Mm-hmm. And then they picked up their guns and they moved right on into the Nintendo 64. Nintendo's next console release was heavily anticipated by fans and critics alike. Codenamed the Ultra 64, it had an incredible marketing campaign that had never been seen before for a video game console.
Nintendo 64.
Nintendo's new game machine is 64 bits, making it the most powerful machine on the market.
When the Nintendo 64 finally dropped in 1996, it was undoubtedly a huge success. But it wasn't without its faults.
Hey man.
Hey.
Want to buy some polygons?
Oh, snap, you got one of them N64s?
What? Things weren't as cartoony anymore. Things were starting to look a little more realistic.
Yep, not by today's standards, but then...
But then they were like, what?
Yeah. Whoa, now you're playing with power, so to speak.
How many dimensions do we get? Three
dimensions?
Things are rotating, things are moving.
That's right. 1996 brought in the Nintendo 64, and of course, rivalries were still high. The Sega Genesis kind of petered out. You could say Nintendo came out on top there, and then they came out with, of course, the Saturn and stuff. But now they had a new contender.
32X and Sega CD and Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, all unfortunately fell by the wayside. Didn't get the game support they needed. Nintendo kept their games rolling for a while.
Yep, and they had the thing about Nintendo that has kept them going from the beginning to even now.
There's one common thread here.
Quality first-party titles.
Absolutely. It's characters we're invested in from our childhood, no matter how old you are currently.
Yep. And the Nintendo 64 launched with one of the greatest games of all time, which was probably cemented it in success, which was Super Mario 64, which...
Still my top 5 games.
Which is... So you take one of our favorite characters of all time, drop them into a whole immersive 3D world.
It was almost like they were dropped into several worlds, because every room you went into was so completely different. And this was the first time that, with the power of 64 bits, that we could create that many worlds, we could save our progress, we could actually try and get all 120 stars.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Did you ever?
Several times. Yeah.
I didn't. So the interesting thing about Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 is they stuck to their guns and remained using cartridges in their system while everyone else went to the disc-based format. And that could be, argued about, that it was maybe not the best decision, and maybe right when they hit their peak, started to go down a little bit.
Right. The cost had to remain very high in order to get all of that information put into a cartridge, and also this was the disc era. I mean, our music came on CDs, our movie was on DVDs, the PlayStation was playing both of those things as well. So it was a huge benefit that they had, that it was one of the first home media consoles that we had that everybody in the world is trying to create right now. And one interesting story that you guys should definitely check out is actually the birth of the PlayStation-Nintendo rivalry. That actually came from a broken down partnership, and I highly suggest you look into the story of the Nintendo PlayStation. She exists.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we go through the latter half of Nintendo's cycle, where we take a look at some of their low periods and what some would call the dark times of Nintendo, and we look forward to the future. Go ahead and press that subscribe button, and we'll see you soon for part 2 of the Boss Battle Show's journey through Nintendo.